Stop what you're doing and listen. Can you hear it? That low hum your house makes when everything is off? That gentle sigh of the refrigerator, the faint buzz from an outlet. Good. Now listen for the sound that doesn't belong. The whisper of movement in a room you thought was empty. The softest, wettest click from the darkest corner of your closet. Don't dismiss it. Don't you dare call it the house settling, because the house has settled. And now, something else is moving in. My grandfather was a search and rescue officer for 3 decades in the Pacific Northwest. He had stories that would make your skin crawl. Things he refused to talk about until he was old and sick, and the memories were bubbling up like tar. One, however, he only told me once. He called it the Staircase Man. They were looking for a lost hiker, a young woman who'd been missing for 3 days near Mount Rainier. It was a standard operation, grid search, dogs, helicopters. On the 2nd day, they found her pack, then her jacket, laid neatly folded on a rock. No signs of a struggle. On the 3rd day, deep in a part of the forest no trail went near, they found a staircase. Just a perfectly constructed wooden staircase standing in the middle of a clearing. It led to nowhere. It was weathered but sturdy, like it had been there for 100 years. The team was baffled. Protocol said to document it and move on, but one of the younger guys, a rookie, decided to climb it. My grandfather screamed at him to get down, a feeling of absolute primal dread washing over him. The rookie laughed it off and kept climbing. When he got to the top step, he just stopped. He stood there for a full minute, looking out over the trees, his back to them. Then he turned around, and his face was utterly blank. No fear, no surprise, no anything. Just empty. He walked down the stairs, picked up his pack, and started walking in a dead straight line, away from the search party. They called his name. He didn't respond. They ran after him, but he moved with an unnatural speed, never stumbling, never slowing, until he vanished into the dense undergrowth. They never found him. And they never found the hiker. When the team went back the next day to photograph the staircase, it was gone. Not a splinter of wood, not an indentation in the ground. My grandfather said sometimes, when he was alone in the woods after that, he'd hear a faint creaking sound like wood underfoot, coming from just above the canopy. I'm a long-haul trucker. I drive the lonely highways at night, the ones that cut through deserts and prairies where you can go 100 miles without seeing another soul. You see weird things out there, lights in the sky, animals you can't identify, but what I saw in Nevada just outside Tonopah wasn't weird. It was wrong. It was about 3 in the morning, dead quiet, the only sound the drone of my engine. My high beams caught something on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a coyote with mange, all patchy and gray. But as I got closer, I realized it was on 2 legs. It was crouched over something, hunched and contorted. It was tall, maybe 7 feet if it stood up straight, and impossibly thin. Its limbs were too long, its joints bent at angles that made me feel sick. It was pale, the color of old bone under the moonlight. As my headlights washed over it, it slowly lifted its head. It had no face, not in the way you'd think. There was no nose, no mouth, just 2 huge, black, wet-looking eyes that reflected my headlights back at me like polished stones. And it wasn't eating what it was crouched over. It was imitating it. On the ground was a dead deer. The creature was twisting its own limbs to match the broken, splayed-out position of the deer's legs. It was a perfect, horrifying mirror image. I slammed on the accelerator, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. In my rearview mirror, I saw it stand up to its full, terrifying height. It watched me go for a full mile, a motionless stick figure of a man silhouetted against the desert, before it turned and just folded itself into the darkness. I take a different route now. I'll add 6 hours to my trip just to avoid that stretch of road. Some things aren't meant to be seen. We bought a house that backed onto a nature preserve in Ohio, miles of untouched woods. We thought it was perfect. Peaceful. For the first few months it was. Then came the whistling. It would start around midnight, always from the same spot deep in the woods. It wasn't a bird. It was a tune, a simple, repetitive, little nursery rhyme kind of melody. Creepy, but we wrote it off as some local weirdo. Then, one night, my husband was out on the back deck having a cigarette. He came back inside, pale as a sheet. "It's whistling back," he whispered. I didn't understand. He said he had started whistling the tune back at it, just messing around. The whistling from the woods stopped. and a moment later the exact same tune started up again, but this time it came from the other side of our yard, right by the fence line. It was like whatever was out there had closed 100-yard distance in complete silence in a matter of seconds. We locked all the doors and didn't sleep a wink that night. The next morning, we found a single, perfect handprint on the outside of our bedroom window. It was long with slender fingers, and it was 5 feet above the deck. We sold the house 6 months later at a loss. The real estate agent told us the previous owners had left for a similar reason. They said it wasn't the whistling that made them leave. It was when it started trying to whisper their names through the vents. My friend Sarah and I used to go urban exploring. Abandoned hospitals, old factories, you name it. Our favorite spot was the old Northville Asylum. Most of it was torn down, but a few of the outer buildings still stood rotting and empty. One night, we were in what used to be the main sanitarium. It was pitch black, and we were using our phone flashlights. We were on the 3rd floor, in a long hallway lined with patient rooms. The air was heavy and cold. Sarah was a few feet ahead of me, and she stopped dead. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I hadn't heard anything. "It sounded like a little girl humming," she said. I got a bad feeling immediately. We weren't alone. We decided to head back, moving slowly down the hall. As we passed one of the rooms, a sound came from inside. A soft, rhythmic thump, 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 like a ball bouncing. We froze, pointing our lights at the doorway. The room was empty, stripped to the bare concrete. But the thumping continued. Sarah, braver than I was, took a step into the room. The thumping stopped. "There's nothing in here," she said, her voice echoing. And then from the end of the hall behind us, a little girl's voice giggled. It was a clear, happy sound that had no business being in that place. We didn't wait. We ran. We scrambled down the stairs, our feet echoing in the silence. As we burst out the front door and into the moonlight, I risked a glance back up at the 3rd floor window we'd just come from. A small figure was standing there, silhouetted against the darkness. It wasn't a girl. It was too tall, too thin, its arms hanging down almost to its knees. It just stood there, watching us. And as we sprinted for the car, that horrible thumping sound started again, not from the room, but from the hallway, growing faster and louder, like something was bounding after us in the dark. I work as a night watchman at a massive logistics warehouse in rural Tennessee. It's a boring job. Miles of concrete floors, towering shelves stacked with pallets, and dead silence. My only company is the hum of the fluorescent lights. One night I was doing my rounds, walking down aisle 14. That's when I saw him. At the far end of the aisle, maybe 200 feet away, a man was standing there, his back to me. He was wearing overalls, just like our day crew. I figured someone got locked in. "Hey!" I shouted. "We're closed!" He didn't move. I started walking towards him, pulling out my mag light. "Sir, you need to leave the premises." As I got closer, I noticed something was off. He was too still. Not just still, but rigid like a mannequin. I was about 50 feet away when he started to turn. It wasn't a normal turn. His head swiveled all the way around, a full 180 degrees, his body staying perfectly still. His face... God, his face was just a smooth, blank expanse of skin. No eyes, no nose, just a wide, ear-to-ear grin full of teeth that were too long and too sharp. The grin stretched wider and wider, the skin around it pulling and tearing. A sound started coming from it, a low, wet, clicking noise. I didn't even scream. I just turned and ran. I didn't stop until I was in my security booth. The door locked. I watched the monitors, my heart hammering against my ribs. I saw him move. He didn't walk. He scuttled, moving on all fours with a horrifying spider-like speed, his limbs bending backwards. He skittered up one of the 40-foot shelves, disappearing into the shadows at the top. I quit the next day. I told my boss I found a better job. I still have nightmares about that grin. Sometimes in the dead of night, I think I can hear that faint, wet clicking sound coming from my attic. My cousin Leo lives up in a very remote part of Maine. He's a trapper, a real old-school mountain man. A few years back, he was checking his trap lines deep in the woods, miles from any road. He came across a clearing he'd never seen before, and in the center of it was a tree. It was a huge, ancient oak. But that wasn't what was strange. Every single branch was covered in shoes, hundreds of them. Hiking boots, sneakers, children's sandals, all tied to the branches by their laces. They were all weathered and worn, like they'd been there for years. Leo was creeped out but also curious. He walked around the tree looking at the shoes. That's when he noticed one pair that looked almost new. A pair of bright red kids' sneakers dangling from a low branch. They looked like they belonged to a little boy. As he stared at them, he heard a sound. A child's voice, whispering from the dense woods behind the tree. It said, "Can you help me find my other one?" Leo's blood ran cold. He knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that he was in terrible danger. He backed away slowly, never taking his eyes off the tree. As he backed up, he saw movement among the shoes high up in the branches. Something was shifting, something large and dark that wasn't the wind. He didn't wait to see what it was. He turned and ran, not even bothering to check the rest of his traps. He told me he's never been back to that part of the woods. He said the thing that scared him the most wasn't the voice, or the thing in the tree. It was that when he got back to his truck, panting and terrified, he looked down and realized one of his own bootlaces had come undone. I'm a geologist, and I spend a lot of time in caves. Usually it's peaceful. The silence is absolute, the darkness complete. But there's a cave system in Kentucky we were mapping that felt different. It felt occupied. We called it the breathing cave because sometimes you'd feel a faint, rhythmic puff of warm, stale air against your cheek, even in chambers with no discernible airflow. We chalked it up to weird pressure dynamics. We were wrong. We were about a mile in, mapping a new passage. It was narrow, forcing us to crawl on our bellies. My partner Dave was in front of me. Suddenly he stopped. "Kill your light," he hissed. I did, plunging us into total blackness. "Listen," he whispered. I held my breath. At first I heard nothing. Then I heard it. A faint scraping sound coming from up ahead in the passage. It sounded like fingernails on rock, and it was getting closer. Then came the whispers. It was a chorus of voices, all murmuring at once, too low to make out any words. They seemed to come from all around us, echoing in the tight space. Dave and I started backing out, moving as quickly and quietly as we could. The scraping got faster, the whispers louder, turning into an angry, chittering hiss. We scrambled back the way we came, our hearts pounding. We didn't stop until we saw the daylight of the cave entrance. We never went back to finish the survey. The official report lists the passage as a dead end due to a collapse. But we know what we heard. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't turned back. What would we have found at the end of that passage? Or more accurately, what would have found us? My dad was a firefighter in rural Montana. He saw a lot of wildfires. He told me that when a forest fire gets big enough, it creates its own weather. It also drives all the animals out. You'll see deer running alongside coyotes, bears alongside rabbits, all of them united in their terror of the flames. But during the big fire of '88, he saw something that wasn't running. He and his crew were cutting a fire break, a desperate attempt to stop the blaze from reaching a small town. The smoke was so thick you could barely see 10 feet, and the roar of the fire was deafening. Through the haze, my dad saw a figure standing at the edge of the inferno. It was tall and impossibly thin, silhouetted against the wall of flames. It was just standing there, motionless, as the 100-foot trees around it exploded into fire. My dad thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, that it was just a strangely shaped, burned-out tree. But then it moved. It took a slow step, not away from the fire, but into it. It walked right into the heart of the blaze and disappeared. The rest of the crew saw it too. Nobody said a word. They just finished the fire break and got out of there. The town was saved, but my dad was never the same. He said that for years after, whenever he smelled smoke, he'd get a flash of that image. A tall, dark figure standing calmly at the gates of hell, looking like it was finally home. When I was a kid, my best friend Mark and I had a tree house in the woods behind his house. It was our kingdom. We spent every summer day there. One afternoon, we were up there reading comics. It was quiet, the way the woods get in the middle of a hot day. Suddenly, we heard someone calling my name. "Michael! Michael, come down here!" It was my mom's voice. I leaned over the railing and looked down, expecting to see her at the bottom of the ladder. But there was no one there. "Mom?" I called out. The voice came again, from a little deeper in the woods. "Over here, honey! I need you to help me with something." Mark looked at me, confused. "Why is your mom in the woods?" he asked. I didn't know. It felt wrong. My mom would never just wander into the forest. I called back, "Where are you?" The voice answered, "Just follow the sound of my voice, sweetheart. Hurry now." But the voice was different now. It was still my mom's, but it was strained, like she was trying really hard to sound like herself. A cold feeling washed over me. Mark must have felt it too because he grabbed my arm. "Don't go," he whispered. We stayed in the treehouse, silent, for what felt like an hour. The voice called my name a few more times, each time from a little farther away, each time sounding a little less like my mother, until it faded completely. When my real mom called me for dinner later that evening from the back porch of the house, I almost had a heart attack. I asked her if she had been in the woods earlier. She looked at me like I was crazy. She hadn't left the house all day. I never went back to that treehouse. Whatever was in those woods wanted me to come down, and I'm so glad I didn't. I work on an oil rig in the North Sea. It's one of the most isolated places on Earth. Just you, 100 other guys, and miles of angry gray water in every direction. The thing about being out there is the sound. The constant, deafening noise of the machinery, the screaming wind, the crashing waves. You get used to it. You have to. But one night, during a bad storm, all the non-essential systems went down for a maintenance check. And for the first time in months, there was a moment of near silence. Just the wind and the rain. We were in the mess hall drinking coffee. That's when we heard it. A song. It was a woman's voice, singing a haunting, beautiful melody. It seemed to come from right outside, from over the water. It was impossible. We were 100 miles from land. A few guys went out onto the deck to look. They came back a minute later, their faces white. They said they couldn't see anything, but the singing was louder out there, and it felt like it was coming from beneath the waves. The foreman, a grizzled old Scotsman, ordered everyone inside and locked the hatches. He told us stories of the old days, of sirens and things that live in the deep. We all thought he was crazy, just spooking us. But then the tapping started. A slow, rhythmic tapping on the underside of the rig's platform, right below our feet. Tap, tap, tap. It kept going for the rest of the night, in perfect time with the haunting melody that never seemed to fade. When the sun came up and the storm broke, the singing and the tapping stopped. When the divers went down later that week to inspect the legs of the rig, they found long, deep scratches in the steel, like something with enormous claws had been trying to pull itself up. My sister and I inherited our grandparents' farm in Kansas after they passed. It's in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by endless fields of corn. The first summer we were there, we started noticing strange things. Tools would go missing from the barn and then reappear in the middle of the field. We'd hear footsteps on the porch at night, but the motion sensor light never came on. We blamed it on local kids. Then one night in August, it happened. The corn was tall and dense, over 10 feet high. It was a moonless night, and we were sitting on the porch swing. A sound started coming from the cornfield. It was a rustling sound, but it wasn't the wind. It was the sound of something huge moving through the stalks, something that was pushing them aside with force. It moved parallel to the house from one end of the field to the other. My sister grabbed my hand, her knuckles white. We just sat there listening. Then, the rustling stopped, directly in front of the house. The silence was worse than the noise. After a full minute of dead quiet, a voice came out of the corn. It was a perfect imitation of our grandfather's voice, a voice we hadn't heard in 2 years. It said clear as day, "Girls, you let your old grandpa in? I forgot my keys." We didn't move. We didn't breathe. The voice called out again, a little more insistent this time. "Come on now, it's cold out here." Then my sister did something I'll never forget. She stood up, her face a mask of terror and rage, and she screamed at the cornfield. "You're not him!" For a moment there was silence. Then a sound came from the corn that was not human. It was a chattering, clicking shriek of pure fury. The rustling started again, this time frantic, moving away from the house, back into the depths of the field, until it was gone. We stayed on that porch until the sun came up, armed with my grandpa's old shotgun. We never heard the voice again. But sometimes, on windy nights, when the corn stalks whisper to each other, I think I can hear a faint, angry chittering just on the edge of hearing. And I know it's still out there, waiting. I was a border patrol agent in Arizona for a few years. Most of the job is boredom punctuated by moments of chasing people through the desert. But there are things out there that aren't on any manifest. We were tracking a group one night using night vision. The trail led us into a narrow canyon. It was eerie, the rock walls amplifying every little sound. My partner Garcia stopped me. He pointed up. On the rim of the canyon, silhouetted against the starry sky, was a figure. It was humanoid, but its proportions were all wrong. It was crouched on the ledge like a gargoyle, its arms long and spindly. We watched it for a minute, and it didn't move. We radioed it in, but dispatch had no other units in the area. We decided to keep moving, keeping an eye on it. We'd walk 100 feet, look up, and it would be there in the exact same spot. We did this for half a mile. Then we rounded a bend in the canyon, losing sight of it for maybe 10 seconds. When we looked up again, it was gone from the ridge. A wave of relief washed over me. Then Garcia grabbed my arm and pointed his rifle down the canyon in front of us. There it was. It was now on the canyon floor, maybe 200 yards ahead, standing perfectly still. It hadn't made a sound. There was no way it could have gotten down that fast and that quietly. We were trapped. It stood there, a tall, dark shape in our night vision goggles. Then it started to make a sound. It was a soft, clicking noise like a Geiger counter, and it started to walk towards us. It didn't walk normally. It sort of glided. Its feet didn't seem to move. We backed away, raising our rifles. We shouted at it to stop. The clicking got louder. When it was 50 yards away, we opened fire. We emptied our magazines. The figure didn't even flinch. It didn't slow down. It just kept coming, the clicking getting louder and faster. We turned and ran. We ran until our lungs burned and we were out of the canyon. We never looked back. The official report says we were spooked by a coyote and discharged our weapons. We both resigned a month later. Garcia moved to Florida. I moved to Chicago. I wanted to be as far away from that desert and that god-awful clicking as possible. But sometimes, when the city is quiet, I swear I can still hear it. My brother is a forest firefighter in British Columbia. They call them smoke jumpers. They parachute into the most remote parts of the wilderness to fight fires before they can spread. He's seen it all. But one story he told me has always stuck with me. His team was dropped into a remote valley to contain a lightning strike fire. It was a small one, and they expected to be out in a day. As they were working, one of them noticed something weird. There were symbols carved into the trees around the fire. They weren't Native American markings or anything they recognized. They were strange, geometric patterns carved deep into the bark. As dusk fell, the fire was almost out, but the wind shifted and they knew they'd have to stay the night. That's when the humming started. It was a low, resonant hum like a giant tuning fork. It seemed to come from the ground itself, making their teeth vibrate. Then came the lights. Orbs of pale blue light floating silently between the trees. They would appear, hover for a moment, and then wink out, only to reappear somewhere else. The crew was on edge, all of them gathered around their camp, rifles in hand. My brother said the strangest thing was the silence. No crickets, no owls, no animals at all. Just the low hum and the ghostly lights. Around 2 a.m., one of the men, a young guy named Peterson, started screaming. He was pointing into the darkness, his eyes wide with terror. "It's in the trees! It's got no skin!" he yelled. They all pointed their flashlights where he was looking. For a split second, they saw it. It was clinging to the side of a massive pine tree about 30 feet up. It was humanoid, but its body was a mess of exposed muscle and sinew, glistening wetly in their lights. It had a long, horse-like face with glowing red eyes. It opened a mouth full of needle-like teeth and let out a shriek that sounded like metal tearing. Then it scurried up the tree with impossible speed and was gone. They didn't sleep. They stayed, back to back until the helicopter came to pick them up at dawn. When they were debriefed, they were told they had experienced a shared hallucination due to smoke inhalation and fatigue. Peterson was given a medical discharge for psychological reasons. My brother still works as a smoke jumper, but he says he never feels alone in the woods anymore. He says he can feel it watching him from the trees, and he never, ever looks up into the branches at night. When I was in college, 4 of us decided to go camping in the Allegheny National Forest. Standard stuff: tent, campfire, cheap beer. The first night was great. The second night, things got weird. We were sitting around the fire telling ghost stories. Suddenly, from the woods behind our camp, we heard a woman crying. It was a heartbreaking sound, full of pain and sorrow. We all fell silent, listening. It sounded close. We called out, "Is anyone there? Do you need help?" The crying stopped instantly. The woods went dead quiet. We were all spooked. We decided to call it a night and get in the tent. An hour later, I woke up. I had to pee. I told myself it was just an animal, a fox or something. I crawled out of the tent as quietly as I could. The fire was just embers now, casting a faint red glow. I walked to the edge of the clearing and did my business. As I was turning to go back to the tent, I saw something. Standing just at the edge of the woods, where the firelight died, was a woman. She was wearing a long, white, old-fashioned dress. I couldn't see her face, it was hidden in shadow, but I could see that she was pointing. She was pointing directly at our tent. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over me. I scrambled back into the tent, zipping it up as fast as I could. My friends were all asleep. I lay there in my sleeping bag, shivering, my eyes wide open, staring at the side of the tent. A few minutes later, I heard a sound. It was the sound of a fingernail, slowly, deliberately, being dragged down the outside of the tent fabric right next to my head. It started at the top and went all the way to the bottom. I clamped my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. The sound stopped. I lay there, rigid with fear, for the rest of the night. The next morning, when we got out of the tent, there was a long, thin tear in the fabric, right where I had heard the sound. There were no footprints, no other signs that anyone had been there. We packed up and left in record time. I've never been camping since. I can still hear that sound in my nightmares, the sound of that single fingernail, and I know that whatever was wearing that white dress wasn't a woman, and it wanted in. My wife's family has a cabin on a lake in northern Minnesota. It's been in the family for generations. The locals all have stories about the lake, about a creature they call the water hag. They say it comes out on foggy nights. We always laughed it off, until last summer. We were up there with our 2 kids. A thick, soupy fog rolled in off the lake one evening, the kind that swallows all sound. We were inside, playing cards. Around 10 p.m., our dog, a big golden retriever named Buster, started growling. He was standing at the big picture window that overlooks the lake, the fur on his back standing straight up. We couldn't see anything but a wall of white fog. Then we heard a noise from the dock, a wet, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled out of the water. My wife told me to go check it out. I grabbed a big flashlight and went outside. The fog was so dense I could barely see the end of the porch. I walked slowly towards the dock, my heart pounding. The dragging sound had stopped. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding muffled and dead in the fog. No answer. I got to the dock and shined my light around. Nothing. The dock was empty, but it was soaking wet, covered in slimy green weeds and smelling of mud and decay, even though it hadn't rained. I figured a log or something had washed up and then floated away. I was turning to go back to the cabin when I heard a whisper right next to my ear. It was a gurgling, wet voice, like someone speaking from underwater. It said, "Pretty children." I spun around, shining my light everywhere. Nothing. I ran back to the cabin and locked the door. We sat in the living room, in the dark, listening. For the rest of the night, we heard it. The sound of wet, bare feet slapping on the wooden deck, circling the cabin. And every now and then, that gurgling whisper, right outside a window, repeating the same 2 words, "Pretty children." At dawn, the fog lifted, and the sound stopped. There were wet, webbed footprints all over our deck. Some of them led up to the kids' bedroom window, where we found long scratch marks on the glass. We left that morning and haven't been back. The locals don't laugh when we tell them our story. They just nod and tell us we were lucky. I'm a park ranger in the Everglades. It's a different world out here. A primal, ancient place. You learn to respect it. There are things in the swamps that have been here longer than people. Skunk apes are the local legend, our version of Bigfoot. Most rangers think it's nonsense. I used to be one of them. I was on a multi-day patrol, deep in the backcountry, checking on a remote research station. I was making my way through a thick mangrove tunnel in my kayak. It was late afternoon, the light getting low. It was dead quiet, except for the drip of water from my paddle. Suddenly, a smell hit me. It was the most foul, disgusting thing I've ever smelled. Like a mountain of rotting garbage mixed with dead fish and sulfur. It was so strong it made my eyes water. I stopped paddling, looking around. That's when I saw it. It was standing in the shallow water, about 30 yards away, partially hidden by the mangrove roots. It was huge, at least 8 feet tall and covered in long, matted black hair. Its arms were incredibly long, hanging down past its knees. It was just standing there, watching me. Its face was what got me. It was flat and wrinkled, almost ape-like. But the eyes, they were intelligent. They were dark and ancient and full of a weary sadness. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. It didn't seem aggressive. It just seemed tired. Then it raised one of its long arms, and in a deep, guttural voice that rumbled in my chest, it said one word: leave. The voice was not human, not animal. It was something else entirely. I didn't need to be told twice. I paddled out of there so fast I nearly tipped my kayak. The smell lingered for another half-mile. I filed my report, leaving out the part about what I saw and heard. I just said, I encountered a large, unidentified animal and was retreating as a precaution. But I know what I saw, and I know what it said. There's a reason parts of the Everglades are called the Big Cypress. It's because things live there, big things, and they don't like to be disturbed. My grandmother lived in a small, isolated house in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina. She was a strange woman, full of old-world superstitions. She always told us never to answer a knock at the door after dark, unless you knew for sure who it was. She said there were things that walked the mountains at night, things that looked human, but weren't. She called them the Hollow Men. When she died, my family had to go to her house to clean it out. We were there for a weekend. The first night, we were sitting in the living room, sharing memories. Around midnight, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't a normal knock. It was a slow, deliberate, 3-part knock. Knock, knock, knock. We all looked at each other. My uncle, a practical man, got up to answer it. Probably just a neighbor, he said. My mother, who remembered my grandmother's warnings, grabbed his arm. Don't, she said, her voice trembling. Just leave it. My uncle laughed it off and opened the door. There was no one there. The porch was empty. The woods beyond were dark and silent. He shrugged, closed the door, and came back to his seat. We thought that was the end of it. About an hour later, my uncle started complaining of a headache. Then he got quiet. He just sat in his armchair staring into the fireplace. We tried to talk to him, but he didn't respond. His eyes were open, but they were vacant, like he wasn't there anymore. We got him to bed thinking he was just tired and grieving. The next morning, he was gone. His bed was made, his suitcase was still there, but he was gone. We searched everywhere. We called the police. They searched for a week. They never found a trace of him. As we were packing up to leave, I noticed something on the dusty floor by the front door. It was a small pile of dry leaves and twigs, arranged in a neat little circle. It hadn't been there before. I think about my grandmother's warning all the time. I think the Hollow Men came knocking that night, and my uncle, he let them in. I was part of a caving expedition in Vietnam, exploring the then newly discovered Son Doong cave system. It's the largest in the world, a place so vast it has its own jungle and weather systems inside. We were days from the entrance, in a part of the cave no human had ever set foot in. The scale of it is hard to describe. It's like walking through a mountain that's been hollowed out. One evening, we made camp in a massive chamber we called the Cathedral. The ceiling was thousands of feet above us. As we were setting up, our lead geologist called us over. He was pointing his headlamp at the cavern wall. There were carvings. They were massive, hundreds of feet tall, depicting humanoid figures with long limbs and round, featureless heads. They were shown bowing down to something, a colossal creature that looked like a cross between a centipede and a dragon. The carvings were ancient, impossibly so. That night, none of us could sleep. A strange feeling had settled over the camp, a sense of being watched by something immense. Then the ground began to vibrate. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a rhythmic, pulsing vibration like a giant heartbeat. It grew stronger and stronger until the loose rocks on the ground were rattling. Then came the sound. It was a deep, chthonic bellow that echoed through the vast chamber, a sound so powerful it felt like it was tearing the air apart. It was a sound of something waking up from a long, long sleep. We abandoned everything. We left tents, equipment, samples, everything. We ran for 3 hours straight, back through the darkness, our headlamps bouncing frantically. We didn't stop until we were in a passage we knew was safe. We never spoke of what happened. The official expedition log states we were forced to retreat due to unexpected seismic activity. But we all know the truth. We weren't alone in that cave. We had stumbled into a place of worship, a temple to a sleeping god. And I think we woke it up. My friends and I used to go ghost hunting in an old abandoned cemetery in the backwoods of Georgia. It was called Hope's Rest, but all the locals knew it as the Weeping Grounds. The legend was that if you went there on a new moon, you could hear the spirits of the unmarked graves crying. We went one moonless night armed with flashlights and a digital recorder. It was incredibly creepy. The graves were ancient, the stones tilted and covered in moss. The air was still and silent. We wandered around for a while, feeling brave. Then my friend Jessica stopped. "Do you guys smell that?" she asked. I sniffed the air. It smelled like ozone, like the air after a lightning strike, and it was getting stronger. Then we saw it. A faint blue light, flickering between the tombstones at the far end of the cemetery. It looked like static electricity, dancing and weaving in the dark. We started walking towards it, our curiosity getting the better of our fear. As we got closer, we realized it wasn't just light. It was forming a shape, a vaguely human shape, but it was indistinct, constantly shifting and crackling. And we could hear a sound now, a low, buzzing hum. We were about 20 feet away when it solidified. For just a second, it took the form of a tall, thin man in old-fashioned clothes. He had no face, just a smooth, glowing void. And then it unraveled. The shape dissolved into 1,000 tiny sparks of blue light that shot out in every direction. At the same time, a wave of cold air washed over us, and a cacophony of voices screamed in our ears. Not just crying, but dozens of voices, all screaming in agony. We ran. We didn't look back. When we got to the car, and I played back the digital recorder, it was just static. But right at the end, after we had driven away, you can hear a clear, calm male voice say, "Hope is at rest now. You shouldn't have woken us." I was a seasonal worker at a remote lodge in Alaska, the kind of place you have to fly into. My job was mostly maintenance, fixing things that broke. The lodge was closed for the winter, and I was the only one there for 2 months, acting as a caretaker. The solitude was intense. Days would go by without me saying a word. The only sounds were the wind and the wolves. One night, a blizzard hit. The snow was coming down so thick I couldn't see the trees 10 feet from my window. I was sitting by the fire, reading. Suddenly, all the power went out. Not unusual in a storm like that. I lit some candles and settled back in. That's when I heard the knocking. It was coming from the massive, heavy oak door of the main lodge. It wasn't a frantic knock. It was a slow, steady, powerful boom. Boom, boom. My heart leaped into my throat. There was no one for 100 miles. It had to be the wind, a branch, something. But the sound was too rhythmic. I grabbed the big fire poker and crept to the door. I looked through the peephole. All I could see was a swirling wall of white snow. I shouted, "Who's there?" The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was terrifying. I stood there, my ear pressed to the cold wood, for a full minute. Then a voice came from the other side of the door. It was a low, guttural whisper, and it didn't sound human. It sounded like rocks grinding together. It said, "I know you're in there. I can smell your warmth." I backed away from the door, my whole body shaking. The knocking started again, louder this time, shaking the entire door frame. Boom, boom, boom! I ran to the back of the lodge and barricaded myself in the pantry. I stayed there all night, listening to that monstrous knocking and the low, gravelly voice that would occasionally whisper things, horrible things, about what it was going to do when it got inside. At dawn, the blizzard stopped, and so did the knocking. When I finally got the courage to go look, the front door was covered in deep gouges. like something with claws the size of knives had been trying to tear its way through. And in the fresh snow on the porch, there was a single set of enormous bare footprints. They weren't human. They were too big, the toes too long and clawed. They led off into the woods and disappeared. I called the main office on the satellite phone and told them I was quitting, effective immediately. They sent a plane for me the next day. I'll never go back to Alaska. There are things that walk in those snows, and they're hungry. The world is older and stranger than we can ever comprehend. We build our cities and light our fires to keep the dark at bay, but the dark was here first. And it remembers. The next time you are alone, the next time you hear a branch snap in the woods or a floorboard creak in the hall, don't try to convince yourself it's nothing. Because nothing doesn't leave footprints. Nothing doesn't learn your name. Nothing doesn't wait patiently for you to turn out the lights. If these stories resonate with a darkness you've felt yourself, subscribe and press the bell icon so you never have to face the night alone. We are a community of watchers and listeners. Share your own unexplained encounters in the comments below. We read them all, because sometimes the only way to make sense of the abyss is to know that others have stared into it with you. Stay safe, and whatever you do, don't listen when it calls your name.